Welcome back to the channel. Hello. Have you ever picked up a ball of variegated yarn because the colors were absolutely irresistible, only then to hesitate because you had no idea what it would actually look like once you started knitting or crocheting? Or you found one color in the ball that you fell in love with, but you're wondering if there's a way to make more of that color appear in your project without having to buy twice as much yarn to get enough of the parts that you like to show up in the pattern. Or are you thinking, as you look at different yarn balls, is it going to be fat stripes or skinny stripes? Or is it going to be speckled? Or are there random patches of color? Is my stitch pattern going to disappear? Again, is the color I don't like going to dominate while another color kind of barely shows up and doesn't really give me the contrast I'm looking for? So if, like me, you don't have a background in color theory or textile design, the decisions can be somewhat overwhelming, or you feel like you're going to spend an awful lot more to get the look that you want. So the good news is that working with variegated yarns really isn't magic. It's just about understanding a few simple principles we'll go through today and giving yourself permission to experiment. So today I'm going to show you how to look at a ball, predict how it might behave, how to test your options before committing to a project or thinking about the right project for the right yarn, and then make design choices that is going to ensure your yarn becomes the star of the show. So as we get started, I'm going to take these 3 yarns that are from 3 recent projects that I've worked on and see if you can actually match these yarns to the labels that are typically used to describe them. Because I think part of the confusion is that the descriptions I see or the descriptions on the labels do actually kind of vary widely. So we'll do a quick game here to see if we've got it right. And I promise you by the end of the video, you will be an expert in picking out variegated yarns for your project. Now, I promise you by the end of this video, this will be all much clearer. But if you are like me and only able really to identify the bottom one as an ombre or a gradient yarn, even though I had read all the labels very carefully, we'll soon see why it can be confusing to so many people how to correctly identify variegated yarns. So let's look at the online descriptions for these 3 yarns. The one that I struggled the most with trying to figure out how it was fitting into this category is what Loops and Threads calls their soft ombre. And again, it's always got the disclaimer, as do all the variegated yarns, that due to the dye process, each yarn is going to be unique and colors may vary. And this is one that I can say is very unusual in that the online pictures can be quite a different color than what the actual yarn variation that I received is. The second yarn is a Caron cake, and this one again has a pretty good picture of what to expect, and it's called not an ombre but a perfect phasing yarn because there is a seamless transition from one shade to the next. And the third yarn that Michaels is showcasing is the Blossom Cake. And again, I purchased the Tide Pool color, very good picture, so you can easily see what you would be seeing in the store. This one again is a pretty accurate color representation, and it's just called a limited edition Blossom Cake. So again, it's not really giving you a clear idea, although if you were to search variegated yarns, that is definitely the category that all 3 of these yarns are appearing in. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions is thinking that all multicolored yarns are variegated, and that's the term I see used often to describe what I think is a really wide range of color changing yarns. And especially online, the descriptions can be misleading or not helpful. So in reality, there are several different styles of color changing yarn, and they all produce very different effects as you're thinking about working them through the projects. So the terms I find most often used are again ombre, which really does easily describe those kind of gradient yarns, and pretty easy when you can see them in a cake. Now again, they can be different because the cake one faded once through the whole ball and a whole project would easily fade. These were described as ombre, which I understand because they gently fade from the blue to the white. But the project I'm working on right now definitely, when I tested out the swatch, had a striping effect. And like these Mandela popular yarns, which again are all variegated, they're a bit more clear when you're looking at the cake because of the way they're photographed and the way they're illustrated. And again, these have very distinct color changes that are a bit more abrupt on the color change. But you can easily see if you're working on a project how these stripes or color changes would play out into a striping effect versus this variegated ball that we used in the game, which I see why some people could describe this as self-striping because I've seen it described that way. But for me, it has a bit more of an unpredictability to the striping and the colors playing out. And so for me, these are more truly what I would describe as variegated yarns that are giving you that sort of unpredictable pooling of color. And again, I highlight this cardigan project I posted recently because I didn't make any changes. I just used the yarn as it flew off the ball, and that's the gradient appearance that I got. Now, again, depending on how the yarn is packaged, if you're looking online and you can't see a lot of information, it can be helpful to go and look at some projects and see pictures of people actually using the various yarns. So again, twist yarns, heathered yarns, they're all in this variegated pool that is described, but again, there's so many different effects that you get by using these different yarn combinations. So one of the things I think about now when I'm shopping for different colors, and again, colors in a variegated kind of ball, is how many colors are there? I'm usually pulled in by one particular color. So I got to step back for a minute and look at the entire palette. So how many colors are there? Do they repeat often? And how long is each color repeating before it changes? So instead of only looking at the colors, start looking at the sequence. And are those color changes abrupt color changes or more ombre gradual blends? So turn the skein around in your hands if you can. If you're sort of really struggling to look because it's not a cake, pull out maybe a meter or two just so that you can notice the rhythm of the colors rather than just the palette. I know I hate playing around with the packaging, so sometimes now I'm pulling out my phone. That's exactly what designers are doing, going to the specific brand website and looking at what additional photos I can see there so that I can really get a true sense of the colors and the repeat patterns in the ball of yarn. So I think retailers are getting better and certainly using more of the actual product shots that are being featured. A lot of those now, if you click through, will show 5 or 6, 7 different photos of the ball from different angles. Ideally, some of them are now showing swatch examples of different swatches made up. And I can always go to sites like Ravelry and put in the name of the yarn and see a bunch of different projects that are using that specific yarn. So now that I've encouraged you to absolutely do that, you're looking at me like I'm crazy and wondering why the same yarn looks so different in all of these projects that you're looking at. And here's where things become fascinating because the yarn doesn't change, but the project changes. So you could be comparing a narrow sock to a hat, to a shawl, to a blanket, to a sweater, and each project has a different circumference or a width, and that's going to change where the color repeats land on every single row. And it could result in soft blending or stacked pooling or stripes or flashes of color or even an almost painterly effect. And so this is going to explain why your friend's scarf might look nothing like yours, even though you've used the exact same yarn. So this ombre yarn I have used on a project I'm going to share next week. And again, it's called ombre, but when I tested it out in the swatch, it definitely had a striping effect. And I was using the blue and white version of this ombre yarn. I've used the exact same yarn in another project, and so this is an earlier video highlighting my kind of one-piece easy crochet top for beginners. And the exact same yarn in the gray and white version of the ombre. So again, you can see why some people would describe it as a variegated striping yarn instead of an ombre effect, but I think everybody would agree that it does have that nice gradient and soft transition between the colors. So how you use it in the project can really play up how you're going to actually get the final result. Again, with this one, I did no changes. I didn't really change up anything other than using the balls. I was traveling and carried them with me. And to get just a different look than the navy, I used the gray. But on the other project that I'm going to highlight next week, I use multiple balls to control the colors. So I'm controlling that ombre appearance. And on the sweater, I definitely had to get people to take off some of the yarn at the right sections or the right color variants in order to make sure your arms on the project match the body of the project. So lots of different projects will take apart a variegated ball and use the colors very strategically in their patterns. Other projects are just, again, using the color as it comes off the balls, and it could create a more kind of sporadic color. Or here's another cardigan I'm featuring recently, which had a variegated look, but a little bit more striping than the other cardigan. So again, swatching will let you see how this plays out. So I think pooling has earned a bit of a bad reputation, but color pooling isn't a mistake. It just is a bit of math. And so when colors begin lining up row after row, they create shapes, and sometimes you'll find them to be beautiful and sometimes you'll think they're distracting, but neither is wrong. So the trick is deciding exactly what effect you like, and so there can be accidental pooling, planned pooling, broken pooling. So don't avoid color pooling, because sometimes you can use it intentionally. And there's some great blogs on some of the yarn sites that showcase some of the pooling opportunities. And this is a great video I watched recently on thinking about color pooling and using it intentionally. So start to experiment a bit before you start a project, because this is where the fun begins. And instead of committing immediately, play around first. And there's some easy experiments that you can do while you're making your regular swatches. So you can change your hook or needle size, change the stitch pattern, kind of start at a different point in the color sequence, working around in round versus flat. Pairing it with a coordinated solid yarn, because a lot of times I find there is a matching solid to a yarn that I've got in my variegated bucket. And so each tiny change is going to produce a surprisingly different pattern or project. And treat it like you're sampling paint colors before you paint a room, because the swatching isn't wasted time. Think of it more as your design sketchbook. And so there's also sometimes one color in the ball that you absolutely adore. Maybe it's the teal or the plum or the gold, and there's several ways to showcase it. So you can rewind the yarn and begin closer to that color. You can alternate it with a coordinating solid. You can choose a stitch pattern that gives the colors room to breathe, or you can decide the yarn is perfect for one project but not another, because sometimes the best design decision is kind of changing the project, not changing the yarn. So if you're like me, you're in this store, you've seen it, it's spectacular, you grab it, but it's actually not what you went shopping for because you had a project in mind, and this is kind of completely giving you a curveball. The other big thing when we're thinking about yarn is choosing the right stitch pattern for a variegated yarn. Now I'm finding that busy yarns often love simple stitches and simple yarns often love complex stitches. So I'm saying that as a helpful guideline, it's certainly not a rule. And I'm leaning towards playing around with stocking net or garter or moss stitch or linen stitch or even single crochet and double crochet as I play around with variegated yarns and notice how the texture changes what my eye is seeing. Sometimes the stitch takes center stage and sometimes the color does, and sometimes they compete. So your goal is really deciding about which one should be the star. So you don't need an art degree and you don't need to understand every color theory principle out there, because I think designers simply ask questions. What do I want people to notice first? The color, maybe the texture, is it the shape? Or is it the movement? And once you begin asking those questions, you'll stop hoping that a yarn will work and start choosing projects that will absolutely let it succeed. So compare again the length of the color repeat to the size of the stitch. And a long color repeat worked in tiny stock stitches is going to behave very differently than the same yarn worked up in a really large crochet stitch. And every project has kind of a main character. So think as you pick your projects, is it the color? Is it the stitch pattern? Is it, the cables? If everything competes for attention, a fabric can feel really busy. But if one element leads and the others support it, the result can often be more cohesive. And so you're going to be more satisfied with the projects. So variegated yarns invite us all to collaborate with the artist that's dyeing those yarns, because every ball contains possibilities. So really, your role is discovering which possibility suits the project you want to make. And the next time you fall in love with a beautiful yarn, don't wonder whether it's going to work or not. Instead, experiment, swatch, play, trust your eye, because there are very few wrong answers, only different design choices. So I'd love to know in the comments, have you ever had a variegated yarn surprise you, either in a wonderful way or in a way you didn't expect? And if you have a favorite tip for working with color changing yarns, share it below so we can all learn from each other. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video where I share an experiment where I used a variegated yarn with a very simple stitch to make a lovely summer sweater. Thanks for watching.